Frank Watson here with POOF, KaPOOF to be exact, for July the 3rd, 2024, with Tom Probasco and John Lowe. Guys, how you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Tom, how about you?
So far, so good.
Well, at our last KaPOOF, we ended up with John Lowe referring to Carolyn Mace's statement that the Vatican has theologians preparing to address the situation of intergalactic life. And John, you commented that that's a rumor. And I think, given that she gave no substantive evidence that the Vatican was doing that we could call it a rumor.
Well, I tell you, the way you raised the question, it sounded like that were making communication, and I could see that they would be doing some investigation in that regard. I would see that, accept that. I don't know that they're doing this, but I could see that where they might be wanting to do that. Yes. I wouldn't see any problem with that.
If we
what would it matter?
Huh?
What would such a thing matter?
Well, John, you want to address that first?
Well, I think it would matter a great deal. Is there life elsewhere? If we think that everything is interrelated, are we not? I'm related to you, you're related to me, I'm related to this world, I'm related to Jupiter, I'm related to the stars out there, the whole universe. There's such a thing as gravity. At the most distant star, that gravity attracts me, and I attract it in a very faint way, but it's still there. So I would think that, Frank, you would probably support this, pretty much this interrelatedness of everything.
I do see the interrelatedness of everything.
In a sense, practically speaking, yeah, there could be question, but we don't know what lies out there as far as other minds, other souls, spiritual truths, scientific truths, so forth and so on. I think to me, it'd be very relevant.
I have seen very credible reports. An ex-Canadian government official, fairly high official, said yes, there is contact with extra terrestrial people or civilization, and there are various people asserting that. What would it benefit the government to be less than forthcoming about such contact?
That's a good question, I think.
Well, let's back up a minute. I understand you're talking about investigation. I have never heard it said that contact had been made. That's brand new to me.
Well, this has never gone to the public media, as to my knowledge, and you have to ask yourself how much control of the media is there, and ask yourself how much control of information is there, and thinking when European ships appeared on the horizon in the Americas, it's my understanding that they were ignored by the native people, or at least not recognized as ships, because they didn't look like anything that they had afloat or had any experience with. It was simply outside their knowledge. So they didn't see them in a way. So there's to some extent, there has to be social agreement that something exists before it can be addressed as something that actually is. If you were walking down, it's like in Alcoholics Anonymous, the elephant in the room that no one talks about. If no one talks about it, is there an elephant in the room?
Mhm.
If everybody ignores it, in a way, socially, it's not there, no matter what you think you see. Or maybe you won't see it because nobody, if you saw it, bad things might happen to you.
Well, I think there's a question that could be raised is, are there secrets that the government knows about? And I think it's been apparent that this has happened to a degree that they don't want the populace people to know about. Why? Does it go back to the War of the Worlds with Orson Welles? Oh, could they take the truth? What would they do? Panic. Do you think there's something of that?
I think that there's something to that. I think that there's also, if people in general worldwide knew that there were extraterrestrials that were in contact with civilizations on Earth, it might cause a realignment that of popular thought worldwide that the governments of the world would not really approve of. It would affect their control of the populations of their countries. For one thing, if it was perceived as a threat, and I think that based on the experience of Native American people, it would have to be at least considered to be the possibility of a threat. And there's also the reports that I've read that there's more than one extraterrestrial contact, and some of them are friendly and some of them are not. And I don't know, we can go a lot of different ways with this conversation, but one of the things I just want to comment on, a friend of mine, Scott Keller, just delivered some classic science fiction books. And if I read through those old books of science fiction, there will be a lot of things that the science fiction authors speculated about that will be history by this time. And science fiction, in a way, really does look into the future or into possible futures, and some of them turn out to be pretty daggone accurate, prophetic. So there's a lot of ways we can discuss this, but what effect would it have on our ideas of God? The fact that there might be life almost certainly is life in the universe or in the multiverse.
Well, it would have a bigger impact on some than it would others. And I'll just say quickly, I think we would do well to better understand the threat that we are to ourselves first.
I agree with you, Tom, on that.
Well, there is that, but one of the things that can unite people is a common enemy.
Well,
Ourselves.
that's
Well, this raises the paper I sent around, the thing we're confronted in November and the cultural war we're faced, the two extremes of fascism and the communist threats on the other hand. And so these are immediate. But also not too far off too is the AI problem, artificial intelligence. And I just saw a man interviewed the other day. Talk about you talk fiction. What is it? The word you used. I have trouble with my words.
science fiction.
Science fiction. Yeah. The good thing about that, I was never much into science fiction myself. However, I must say that wherever you have imagination, you've got to go follow that because that's one of the great gifts of the human being to imagine in a creative way to press forward for new truth. Because we are finite creatures and we know that we're finite, and therefore we're aware of the infinite, and that goes beyond. And so we can't help but ask questions. And go with that is the imagination. Well, anyway, this expert man as regarding AI was saying that instead of AI being a threat to us, it's something that can be brought within our very being, within what we have already, with the genius of the creator in our brain, in our mind.
Yeah.
And he even suggested that, now this is kind of wild sounding, but you can take the cells like that of the brain and have them separate from the brain that would actually feed into our brain the other cells outside us, along with the computer and all that sort of thing. And it sounds so wild. He says, but you see, this could be used in a creative, progressive way. But he said the whole thing, it goes back to of course, what you're saying, raising Frank, the hubris, the sin of a human being. How would we use this in a good way? And this is the problem that the atheists are facing today. And I brought this out the other day when we talked, that the atheists are beginning to see that if it's strictly a material point of view, just a natural point of view, even without the sense of God, without something beyond, they're sort of bankrupt as to finding a basis for morality. The best they can come up with is sort of well-being. And this then really affects our attitude toward the Constitution. The Constitution is a rather neutral statement. It does say that we're endowed by the Creator. So that sets the human being above just evolution, just chance product. But that there's something beyond us that lifts us above just the material, just blind force, that gives us a dignity that really equates with the gifts that we already have. So I'll go on. Go ahead, Frank, you're going to say something. I think you were going to say something. Frank, were you going to say something?
Well, I did a quick Google. The Canadian Defense Minister, ex-Canadian Defense Minister, guy by the name of Hellier, asserted UFO contact, and also asserted that extraterrestrials were unhappy about Earth's violence. So do a Google search on Canadian Defense Minister UFO, and you will find it on Google. Read it at your leisure, and let's talk about that in the future, because there are others. You know, an astronaut reported a UFO. There's reports of UFOs being shot down and pilots, but this is interesting to me for several reasons, and one of which is, how does that reposition a planetary God? If we are we going to think that God would be a God only of Earth? Would he only address, not just would he only address the Israelites, but would he address interplanetary beings? Would God be limited to Earth civilizations or Earth people? Are there other gods for other planets? What's the theology going to be? What's going to be the truth about divinity, and how's that going to affect how we see Jesus, for instance?
Well, I think I would say that Orthodox Christianity, the Judeo-Christian point of view, would not speak of God as a God, for one thing, but as being. And this would follow with the highest of philosophy of Plato, Aristotle, so forth, being. And that this would transcend everything. In the beginning, God.
Well, it sounds like to me that at that point we have to look at an equivalency between our English word of God and the Chinese word of Tao, and that the book of the Tao states the Tao that can be told is not the true Tao. In other words, God is greater than our ability to conceptualize God.
But you see, but Frank, that can become 100% or in itself. You see, that goes into what we call postmodernistic thinking, which says there's no truth. If you push that far enough, there's no ultimate truth, and that becomes an absolute in itself. So if you say there's no absolute truth, then that's an absolute truth. You see, so that's a contradiction.
I think that we could, if we assume, as I do, that the Tao is a pretty accurate description of the creative force, that there could be within that force a planetary God.
I disagree with you. I don't think it's accurate.
Well, I don't know. I don't have an opinion as to whether it's accurate.
No, I'm saying its viewpoint's wrong.
Okay, how so?
Because there are different kinds of truth. There's objective truth, and there is holistic truth, spiritual truth. Now, so one is scientific, one is of value. And so scientific truth is based on getting more and more truth, bits of truth, data, information. And that goes on forever. We never get it all. Example, you take with you and say your wife, Frank, you and your wife. Now, she has information about you. The big word is about. Truth about. Truth about you. Well, she knew some things about you, say 20 years ago, if I could put it that way. But since then, she's learned more about you right along. And, you know, you've had some physical problems lately, more and more truth about you. But I bet you one thing she's certain about, that she loves you. Certain. And I think it's the same thing with her. And your children. Certainty. This is holistic. There's a difference with the bits of truth and the whole. You could say, boil a pan of water. And what does that do? Well, the water gets faster and faster. And of course, that's heated by the energy below, molecules rapidly moving around, I should say. And of course, that's bits of energy and so forth. But another way of pointing out is that, well, I'm boiling the water to brew a cup of coffee. That's certainty. That I know. But the other, I don't know all about that. But it's one thing I'm certain of. I'm doing this because I want to boil a cup of coffee. Two different worlds. So don't confuse the two.
I think that one of the things that I really find of value in centering prayer and meditation is that it takes me to direct experience and bypasses words. I can try to describe what I experience, but it's not the same thing as the experience.
Well, I agree with you. That's why I like it too. I like it too. But there's another way of looking at it too, because the Holy Spirit acts in weird ways, different ways. What about the day of Pentecost? Enthusiasm, they spoke in tongues all over the place, unknown tongues. And still do. And so there's the peace side, and there's the mystical side, but there's the enthusiastic side too. So it can manifest itself in different ways. And also, what did they do? They shared going back to capitalism, they shared one another the needs, almost communistic. And they broke bread together daily.
Okay, let's throw this over to Tom, who's been sitting back listening with somewhat of an interest. And Tom, you come at things from poetry, which is a particular proficiency and aesthetic of words.
Yeah, and when John talks about, well, both of you, the words, you want to get past it, and that's because poets use words. That's why you create something called a poem. And
calm? Is it the word calm? Calm?
You create something, somebody creates something called a poem.
Poem.
Oh, and puts it out, a poem, P-O-E-M, puts it out in the world, and it means, and that's kind of the nature of poetry. It means one thing. Maybe most people will interpret a particular poem similarly, others very differently, and some will be sort of not understood by anybody, maybe even the writer. So that's what that makes me think of. Where you talk about centering prayer, it's another way to approach something that you're not trying to describe in words, which seems a little counterintuitive. But I also wonder too, John or Frank, in all of this, we approached this last time, evangelical.
Yeah.
What is that how does that have to do with all this difference of opinion, interpretation, or whatever you want to call it? What is an evangelical? Now, I suppose it's the case that not all evangelicals approach things the same way. But you said you had used the term for yourself, John, evangelical Catholic. I got
Yes.
that right. And what is that? What is the responsibility? I'll just use that term to start it off. What is the responsibility of a evangelical Catholic? If that even makes sense.
It really goes back to St. Paul, who proclaimed the gospel. And what is the gospel? It points up the human need that if we could all find God on our own, which the religions attempt to do by and large throughout the world, to what degree do they find it in truth and so forth and so on? And as I would say theologically, that there is the Spirit of God works within all human beings, as John's Gospel says, that the light shineth in darkness and the darkness does not put it out. However, if that was adequate in itself, Christ would not have needed to come. In other words, with human sin and hubris, we've talked about, even today, good night, the use of the powers of AI and all that, and all this science and all. What do we do with it? How do we work it? It's a moral issue. It's a deeply spiritual, metaphysical matter. How do we deal with it? And that's why God revealed himself in a special way. Now, we've talked about revelation before. If you're going to have it's all based on relationship. It goes back to relationship. You and I, Frank and his wife, my children, me and my wife, and the ones who relationship. It's so important, and our relationship to God. And so it's more than just, as St. Paul says, we all have an awe of God's creation. And the Dow's right about that. I mean, all that you see out there, good night, the awe and the wonder of it all, the beauty. I'm talking about poetry, the beauty of creation, and the within that we all have a need for, because we're finite. We have a crying out. The Buddhist is right. The desire for something. I'm contradicting myself there, because the Buddhists didn't desire anything, but there are those who seek out from within, and St. Paul speaks of even the poets may find it from within.
So how does that affect, Frank? Is that
Well, let me finish though, Tom.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That it can be, for it to really be personal for God, he must reveal himself as a person. For there to be the revelation, if I'm going to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, with God, it's more than just if and, the awe and poetry within, sort of a blind feeling after. It's made personal. So we can say God is love, but is love God? I think love is of God, but if it's really to the depth of it could go, is that it's made personal. So God revealed himself in a person, in a human being. And he went so far in that love to die on the cross for us, whereby we forget, no matter what we did with him, we did everything, don't we all crucify him, as even Nietzsche said. His blood is on our hands. He goes that far. God goes that far to show his love for us. That's the love of God. Talk about personal love. And that's the gospel. That's the proclamation. That's the evangelical. That God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And
So
our need is that. Our need is that kind of relation, and with one another. So my highest of the hierarchy we've talked about is love God with our whole being and love our neighbors ourselves. That I'm certain of. If I'm wrong, God forgive me.
well, so how does that relate to evangelical Catholicism or evangelical I
Well,
don't know if there is
that's
such a
even
thing
though
as a,
the good thing about the reformers is they brought this out when the Catholics were weak, and they're still weak with it. Proclaim right now they're having a Eucharistic revival. Wonderful. But if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, well, what good is the Eucharist? What is the meaning of the Eucharist? If, that you receive Christ through communion, through the sacrament. Why? In a personal way, in a real way. But if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, what good is the sacrament?
Let's
But
take this back to a definition of evangelism. And according to the Oxford languages, as a noun, the spreading of the Christian gospel by public preaching or personal witness. And a second definition, zealous advocacy of a cause. I arrived in a high state of evangelism. So, as an evangelist, a Catholic evangelist, you would feel a responsibility for spreading the gospel. It's not enough just to believe it; you have to witness to the world that of the truth of that.
it goes back to that word about. Remember, we said more and more information about. It's not that. It's more than that. So you have the creeds, you could have information about, God created this, that, sort, and recite the creed, yes. And if you really believe it, fine. That's why the creed is there. But it goes to a deeper relationship again. And if that relationship's not there, then it's wanting.
And if
That's why I'm an evangelical Catholic. But then then you have this kind of relationship built in with these individuals, subjective depth relationship, then baptism means oh so much. And so I'm saying that being born again in this way, if I want to use that word, with baptism, there are two sides of the same thing. The baptism is bringing this into the church, which is the extension of Christ in the world. The church is the extension of the incarnation. It's the body of Christ. But you've got to have it, first of all, in your inner being, your inner soul. Now, often what the church does, when they bring people in the church, then they'll find it. Well, sometimes that works. Sometimes it does. But I think the other is even better. As the eunuch, when Philip met the eunuch on the road to, where was it?
Damascus.
Yeah, he was reading Damascus. That's right. No, that's not this Philip, the eunuch. Anyway, he believed first, and then he was baptized. Works beautifully. If you really believe it, you have that in your soul. So what I'm saying is, evangelical, yes, and the church. That's why I'm an evangelical Catholic.
and if this can even be said, how does this affect how you approach the world as an evangelical Catholic, as somebody else who leaves that descriptor off?
I have my other. I'm sorry. I have my other Zoom group, and they're all born again. I'll tell you that. In all ways, they're very. Most Catholics I run onto are really devout Christians. But it bothered me recently when one who introduced Bishop Barron, who was just a swell little guy, and he always introduces it to the Word of Fire, which Bishop Barron. There's no doubt about Bishop Barron believing in a relationship with Christ. But he said, now these Protestant evangelicals, they always speak about having this relationship with Jesus Christ in their lives. Should we as Catholics have that? And I thought to myself, good night. Here's this guy. I think he must believe that. And then Barron, then he said, well, we do have the icon of Christ, in the when you read the gospel, you have an idol, a vision of him in your heart, and so forth. And so he tweets that. And then I've had when I used to teach in school, that I used to ask them, "Do you have a relationship with Christ?" And well, a lot of the Catholic kids didn't know what I was talking about. They were raised in the catechism and so forth, graduated in church school, and that's where they were raised. What? Getting bits of information, you see. Well, a lot of that was good because they did get conditioning about God and the world and so forth, but you got to go beyond that. And a lot of times there was not when you become adult, they didn't get beyond the catechism,
There's
where
one,
truth becomes a persuasion, not just, yes, that's the way it is. That's the way they were taught.
there's one definition of religion that I was introduced to in a religious studies class at IUPUI in Indianapolis. And that is that religion is the truth about power in the world. And I think when we approach religion kind of from the outside, and we start looking for, say you do a power structure analysis of the powers of the world, and after you've done with all of the materialist powers of the world, the individuals, the corporations, the governments, and look at how all of these things relate and look at the spaces between the things that you know. For instance, the communist countries are decidedly atheistic in their official nature. But the people have experiences that are not contained by the atheism of their government, and it affects the ability of the government to control and direct the people. People have something within us that seeks for the truth about all things, and there's something within us that does not respond well to power for the sake of power.
I think it's the same thing we're facing